The problem the church has is unique because it claims that it is a fulfillment of the Jewish Bible. As it turns out, the core Christian claims are opposed by the Hebrew Bible. As it turns out, this is another area that Christians widely misunderstand the problem of their truth claim. The one thing that's not wrong with the church is the distance of time between when the putative events occurred and when the Christian Bible was written. That's what's completely irrelevant. It's not a matter of time. You know, people can write about 9/11 today and they could in 100 years from now. It's not the distance of time. That's exactly what's not wrong about the New Testament. It's not relevant to any of us how far away it was written. What is relevant is its veracity. The problem the church has is unique because it claims that it is a fulfillment of the Jewish Bible. As it turns out, the core Christian claims are opposed by the Hebrew Bible. See, Christians, I understand they feel that their faith is under attack, but that's because they're making shocking truth claims, which they shouldn't. 1 Thessalonians was written only maybe 4950. That's not the issue, is the veracity of the text. Now, there is one point that is very striking, and that's you could look at Mark that it's chronologically earliest. This is not a controversial point. Almost all Christians would agree that the book of Mark is earliest, although it doesn't appear that way. And Mark is the least embellished of the Gospels. That means you have no infancy narrative. That means it's likely more primitive. And this bothers Christians. So I understand why Christians are bothered by the dating. But it's not how far away. It wouldn't make a difference if Mark was written 10 years after 30. It doesn't make a difference when it was written. What is striking rather is the order that was written. If Christianity is in fact a religion that's developing and accumulating mythology, so what we would expect to find is the earliest gospel, chronologically, would have the least embellishment in it. So Mark is very much an adoptionist book, which means there's no virgin birth, there's no incarnation, none of that. We're introduced to Jesus in the book of Mark as an adult, at his baptism. That's how book of Mark opens up. Mark, moreover, doesn't have any resurrection appearances. That means Jesus doesn't appear to anyone in the book of Mark, which really ends at Mark 16, verse 8. The women are told that Jesus rose from the dead, and they said nothing to anyone, and the book ends. And Christian scribes later, who found that so troubling, found that so disconcerting that they actually invented the last 12 verses of the book of Mark and shoved it in there so that Mark has resurrection appearances. So it is not the age of the book or the distance of time from when the putative event occurred to when it's written down. That's not important. What is an ancillary element of this that is very striking is that we can predict that the book of Mark will be least embellished, meaning no virgin birth, none of that stuff, and no resurrection appearances. Because of the way the ordering of the New Testament is set out, that Matthew appears first, I could say with confidence that there's probably not a person on this planet that read the book of Mark that has not yet read the book of Matthew. So because people read Matthew first, and Mark and Matthew and Luke are very similar. That's what they call synoptic gospels. So people just read it. They don't even know that Mark doesn't have an infancy narrative because it's just like a blur to them. And that was a very smart thing that a church father would do later on, that is order them with Matthew first. Because if Mark were first, that would be more noticeable. And certainly we would expect to find the virgin birth later creeping in Matthew and Luke, independently developing the plot devices, so they're very, very different. And then we would expect to find in the book of John the highest Christology, where you would have the prologue where Jesus is the Word, the Logos, and the Word became flesh. I mean, those 18 passages in John are nowhere else to be found. No one says anything like that in the Gospels. It's not important when the New Testament was written. That's not relevant. It is very curious that the most embellished gospel is John and the least embellished gospel is Mark. Also, I write about this in Volume 1, that the most anti-Jewish book in the Christian Bible would be the later one. And Mark, although the Jews are culpable for killing Jesus, and Pontius Pilate was a lackey, but we don't have anything where Jesus is telling Pontius Pilate in an conversation that actually you're totally not responsible for this, and the Jews are. The book of John is much more amped up to be anti-Jewish and exculpating Pilate, getting him off the hook. This is the Jews completely, and the Jews literally gave over Jesus to be crucified in John. So that's interesting. And we would expect, as an example, the Gospel of Peter, which did not make it into the Christian canon. And I say thankfully didn't make it in because it's even more anti-Jewish. Thank goodness how much more damage would have been done if the Gospel of Peter had made it in. So, right, that's important. The order is important, is intriguing, but the distance of time, you got it all wrong. The Torah was given to us 2,448 after creation. That's not relevant. The question is it true or not? But Christians are very defensive about this. And especially the more they study, the more they realize that this is problematic.
אשר מלך בטרם